Now we are taking the citation of Professor Jesse Chigozie Uneke. He is the Professor of Infectious Diseases and Health Policy and Health Systems. He has different leadership positions. One of them is currently the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academics for Ebonyi State University. He's the founder and director. Sorry, I'm having issue with the screen. He's the founder and director of the African Institute for Health Policy and Health Systems in Ebonyi State University. He's also the director for the World Health Organization Evidence to Policy Network, that's EVIPNet Nigeria. Also, he's the director for the World Health Organization Alliance for Health Policy and Systems Research. He's also the director, the founding president for the Society for Health Policy Research and Knowledge Translation, Nigeria. He's also the national consultant for Nigeria West African Organization Moving Evidence to Policy Project on Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health Nigeria. And he's the regional consultant for West African Health Organization Development of Evidence-Based Policy-Making Guidance Projects for Nigeria. His full bio is on the page 7 of the program sheets, of the program document that was sent to all participants. So you can go through the program document for more details about him. He has been committed to mentoring practitioners, researchers, and policymakers for over 4 decades, and he has published for over a decade, and he has published over 40 publications that are related to evidence-informed policymaking, and is happily married with children. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Temitope, and good morning to all participants. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning for this very important exercise. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let me see. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir, we can, sir.
Okay. All right. Yes, so we'll be talking about the foundation of policymaking and evidence use, and this is just the first aspect of it. Let me say here that what I will try to do is something that is not academic, so to say. Most of what I'll be doing is to share some of the experience we have had over the last more than 10 years now on this subject of moving evidence to policy and practice, not only in Nigeria, but also in the West African sub-region, principally where I am focusing on. And then, of course, we are also covering Africa, and then also at the global level. So I will try as much as possible to make it as practical as possible, so that you can have an understanding of what the evidence to policy process is that will help you in your own various areas of operation. Now, I love lions a lot. I wish I can have one as pet in my house. Well, maybe that's a topic that we'll look at another time. But let me start with this. I know I am on the right path because things stopped being easy. That is one of the quotes associated with the lion. If you know the lion, it's, yes, they call it they call it the king of the jungle. But if you watch, you discover that hunting is even very, very difficult for them. From the information I have, their hunting success is less than 30%. So it's not really very easy. And I want to use it to start here. Getting evidence to policy process is not a very simple and straightforward phenomenon. So when we'll be getting into some complexities associated with it, you will have a better understanding of what we are talking about. It's not really easy, but it is doable when you understand the principles associated with it. Now, we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who have been following the SDGs from the time it was the MDGs, you will understand that there were a lot of issues associated with the MDGs that made so many low and middle income countries not to be able to succeed in achieving the targets. And one of it was that there was no sustainability mechanism associated with the MDGs. It was all about depending on the external donors to do almost everything. But now it was discovered that that arrangement wasn't working, especially for low and middle income countries. And that was what led to the establishment of the SDGs, so that you can now begin to look inwards. How do you sustain your development from within, not from without? And that's the philosophy of the SDGs. And I'm happy to be talking to those of you who are coming from the environmental background. One way or the other, your work is linked to the environment. And it's very, very interesting. And that's one of the reasons I'm presenting this. If you look at the SDGs, you will discover that almost 10 out of the 17 areas of focus of the SDGs have to do with the environment. Let's look at number 2, zero hunger. It has to do with agriculture, and you cannot remove agriculture from the environment. I'm happy that we have a participant from Federal University of Agriculture. And then if you look at number 3, good health and well-being, there is no way you can remove good health from well-being from the environment, because there are so many environmental determinants of health. Even the COVID-19 that we're talking about, it's a health issue, but it's rooted in the environment. That's why we're talking about physical distancing, sanitizing your hands, and then it is now in airborne and things like that. So it also has to do with the environment. Look at number 6, clean water and sanitation. Of course, that's the environment. And then look at number 7, affordable clean energy. You're also talking about energy, and that has to do a lot with what happens in the environment. Look at number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. That's just rooted in the environment. And then look at number 11. You're talking about sustainable cities and communities. That's also has to do with the environment. The same thing with 12, all right? And then you go to 13, climate action. Everything about climate is the environment. And then you come to 14, life below the water. You're talking about the aquatic environment. And then of course, 15, life on land, and all that. So if you look at you see that those of you from environmental background who are doing something on environmental policy, you have a very critical and very important role to play as far as the SDGs are concerned. And that's one of the things about this meeting. I'm so happy because we also have been looking for a way to engage other social sectors, social systems, apart from health. We started this work from health, but we now discover that there is no way you can isolate health and be able to achieve the desired health outcomes if you don't also look at it from the lens of other social sectors, especially the environment. So that's why I want to congratulate all of you who have been able to be part of this, because I believe that after now, there are a lot of things you are going to learn that will help you to be able to partner with us so that we can move this evidence to policy issue in Nigeria in a very, very effective way. Now look at the 6 steps to achieving a sustainable development. Hello? Can you hear me?
Please go ahead, sir. Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead, sir. Please unmute yourself, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Oh, fine. Now, if you look at the 6 steps on the slide, you will also notice that 4 out of the 6 are also rooted in the environment. If you look at this, consumption and production, decarbonization, energy, food biosphere, and water, and of course, smart cities. These are all part of the steps to achieve the SDGs, and they are all rooted in the environment. So I don't see Nigeria achieving the SDGs without a strong link and strong focus on the environment. And that's why it is very, very important that we begin to look at how to mobilize stakeholders on the environment discipline and ministries and MDAs and other related agencies to begin to take their place in the mainstream of policy making for the environment, so that we can be able to achieve the SDGs and not be left out, among other countries, especially the low and middle income countries. Now, going ahead, okay. Now, what is policy? We are talking about moving evidence to policy. So what is policy? Now, Miller in 1987 gave a very useful definition. He said, policy can be defined as the aggregate of principles, stated or unstated, that characterize the distribution of resources, services, and political influences that impact on the well-being of the population. Now, if you look at those key terms there, distribution of resources, services, political influences that impact on the well-being of the population. Now, it is important you understand that resources are scarce. Sometimes when people talk about underfunding, inadequate resources, there is no place in the world where you have anything in abundance. There is no place. Even in the most developed countries, they still have scarcities. So it's not a big deal for us in Nigeria. But you see, that's why policies are made, so that policies can help us to be able to look at how resources will be managed that are scarce. It's not all about this, the resources not being there, but the most important thing we're talking about is management of the resources. If you're able to manage the resource that you have, you can go a long way than somebody who is wasteful. And that's what brings about policy. There is this National Strategic Health Development Plan, 2010 to 2015. I decided to place the page, the endorsement page. This is one of my most favorite documents, because I use this to demonstrate the fact that there could be commitments made by those who are operating at the very highest level. Now, this document was signed by the 36 state governors and the president and the vice president in 2009. And that is to show that they are absolutely committed to this. And we want to see this also happen in the environmental sector. Because the environmental sector, like I've shown you, is critical to achieving SDGs. And then if we have this kind of commitment, governed with the Strategic Development Plan for 5 years by 2009, I want to see we have Environmental Strategic Development Plan signed by the state governors and the president and the vice president himself. So that's what we are looking forward to. And this is one of the processes that will help us to get there. Now, there is a big question. Sorry, let me move this. Okay. Now, why are government policies not resulting in the expected impact socially and economically on the lives of the populace in Nigeria? Now, that's a big question. It may surprise you. Nigeria has one of the highest number of policies in Africa as a country. There is hardly anything that you don't have policies on. Very soon, we'll soon be having policy on air. There is everything, there is policy. But, you know, why is it that policies are made and we are not getting the expected results? And that's a very critical question that it's important that we begin to consider. Now, the main reason is that policy making process is very complex. In fact, some experts have described it as a messy process. Now, look at this, what I have on the screen here. When you are talking about policy, it is not done in isolation. You have the physical environment, you have individuals, you have the social environment, you have community, society, place and geography, socio ecology, climate. There is always an intersection. And if you look at all this, nothing is working in isolation. This is one of the reasons why I feel so bad for this country, because sometimes people take things in isolation. Nothing works in isolation. Everything is interlinked. And that's why we are promoting so much of intersectoral collaboration. And then even within the ministries, people should learn to work together. And the reason is that policy making is a very complex thing. And then you need to have a very good understanding of it. Now, how do you understand this? Let's look at the different types of systems. Okay. Now, your vehicle, this is a key to your vehicle. Very easy. All you need to do, just get into your vehicle, put the key in the ignition, and just turn it, and the car starts if the car is all right. So there is nothing complex about it. Even when you open this, you won't see any complex, configuration. All right. We can call it simple. But look at this. This is a car. It has various parts. This is more complicated than the key itself, because there are so many things that are inside the car. There are so many things you need to understand, and all of them work together. The tires, the steering, the engine, everything is working in a coordinated fashion, but it's more complicated than the first one. But look at this. We see this as a common sight in places like Lagos, Kano. This is a complex, this is a mess, because you cannot coordinate anything here. You cannot control anything here very easily. This is complex. And this last one is what policy looks like. And it is very, very important we begin to understand it from that perspective. Now, let's look at some clear example of the first one. And a typical is to make a recipe for food. Now, we all who are cooking a particular dish, you have been cooking it for maybe up to 10 years, and you discover that each time you cook that particular dish, people will know that you are the one that cooked it. Now, the reason is that you've so much mastered it that you know that after 5 minutes, you drop your Maggi. After 3 minutes, you are putting your salt. After 1 minute, you are putting your meat and whatever. And at the end of the day, the food is coming out almost close to what you have been getting in previous experiences of making the food. So for that, we call it a simple system. But look at this. Sending a rocket to the moon is complicated. Yes, it's complicated, but scientists have, to a large extent, still been able to put down formula that will launch a rocket out of the earth, and it will land in the moon with high level of precision. That is more complicated than making a recipe. And that's why sometimes, because of the complicated nature, anything can go wrong. We have had situations where rockets are launched and they blow up, even at the point of taking off and things like that. So it's complicated, but it is not as compared to the first example we have given. Now, but look at this, raising a child. We will all know that, there is no, or there are no two children, even if they are twins, that you use the same approach for all of them. And that's why you have in a family, you have a child that is having a different temperament, you have another child that is having another kind of temperament. Everybody is not the same, but they are coming from the same family. So that's complex. And that's why some people will have problem with one child and then they will not have problem with another child. Now, the reason is that you can't use exactly the same method for every child and get the same result at the end of the day. So that's introducing us to a complex system. Now, what it means now is that in a complex system, you need to make more effort. You need to have better understanding. You need to progress with understanding before you be able to understand a complex system. And that's why what we are trying to do in the evidence to policy process. There are a lot of things you need to understand about it because the society is dynamic. As the society is improving, there are a lot of things, complex things about the society that you need to understand. All of you will agree with me that Nigeria is not as it used to be 20 years ago. We are now in a new dispensation. And even this COVID-19 has now introduced another new dispensation, a new world order that people are now trying to adjust. There is even the speculation that we may not be able to get back to the pre-COVID-19 era again because COVID-19 has changed a lot of things in the world and it may be difficult to reverse all those things again. As a matter of fact, we now have a new world order that the virus pandemic has introduced. That's how it is in the human system. And that also applies to policy making. So why do we have weak policies in Nigeria? Number one, lack of understanding of the complexity of the policy process, policy making process. I've said that policies are not adequately informed by evidence. And then we are lacking intersectoral collaboration. And then most importantly, policies are not contextualized. I will be talking about this later, but let me just briefly let you know about this last one. You know, we are living in a country that is so diverse. Nigeria is so complex, is a complex entity that even in the same state, when you move from one local government to another, you see variations. You see people having different ideologies, different beliefs, different culture, different tradition in the same state. In fact, even within the same local government area, you'd still find some of those differences. And these things need to be incorporated in the policy making process. But that's where we are missing it. But hopefully, we'll have a better understanding on this so that it can help us to be able to drive the evidence to policy process. Now, what is evidence-informed policy making? Now, in EIPM, there is a shift away from opinion-based policies and practice to a more rigorous rational approach. That's what we're talking about. A more rigorous rational approach that gathers, critically appraises, and uses high-quality research evidence to inform policy, making, professional practice, and systems operation. Now, but we know that policy making, evidence to policy making goes beyond just the use of research evidence. In addition to scientific evidence, we have what is called the colloquial evidence, all right? The colloquial evidence, and then also experiential evidence, which includes economic, attitudinal, behavioral, anecdotal information, along with knowledge and opinion of experts, as well as judgments, insights, history, analogies, local knowledge and culture. All these things are part of the evidence, and we need to bring it together. Now, why do we need research evidence? Yes, we have other ones, but we also need research evidence as the critical component of the evidence-making process. Now, WHO, in one of their documents, noted that better use of research evidence in development policy making can save lives through more effective policies that respond to scientific and technological advances, use resource more efficiently, and better meet the needs of the citizens. Then I saw something that was stated by the director of Tanzanian Council of Science and Technology, Dr. Mshida. He said, if you are poor, actually you need more evidence before you invest, rather than if you are rich. Now, WHO has now taken that quote as a major way of driving the evidence to policy process. If you are poor, you need more evidence because you cannot afford to waste than if you are rich. And for a country, Nigeria, where we are talking about scarcity of resources, we need evidence so that we can be able to invest better. Now, how do you identify evidence? Now, identifying evidence for use in policy making requires the development of a robust, transparent search. There is what is called protocol and planning search, which I have also stated here. You need to have a way to be able to gain access to research evidence through robust search and transparent search. We will talk about that maybe in the second class. But the aim is to identify the best available evidence that you need to be able to address a research question. And this involves forensic search. And then you need to create precise questions. You need to match key databases. You need to adopt a pragmatic and flexible approach. And you need to have an understanding of existing database. Like I say, the evidence to policy process, it's demanding. And that's why you need to have this understanding so that you can be able to do it effectively. And if we look at the different evidence that we have available for policy making, we classify them into 5 key levels. Let me start from level 5, which is the lowest. Someone once told me, or I once treated a case like this. You can call it hearsay. That's the lowest level of evidence. You know, whenever I teach this in the class, I ask my students that where do you classify gossip in terms of evidence? Everybody will say, it's at the lowest level. Because if one person is telling you, this is what I feel about this, it doesn't mean that that is what it is. I remember in my secondary school, where one of our teachers, he was standing in front of the assembly line, and he whispered something to the boy that is in the front and asked the boy to pass it. By the time he got to the last person, he asked the last person to shout it. When the person shouted it, it was different from what he told the first person. So hello, I hope you cannot hear me.
Yes, we can hear you,
Hello?
sir. Go ahead, sir. We can hear you,
Yes.
sir. Go ahead.
So, okay. You know, the man was surprised, but there was no need to be surprised, you know, because if you pass an information to somebody, by the time he's getting to another person, he may add or subtract 1 or 2 things and present it in the form that is appealing to him. So that's why we classify that as the lowest form of evidence. Then we go to the next one, level 4, evidence from qualitative literature review and other publications, where you interview people and they make their comments. That is also personal to them, and then it is not something that can be generalized. Then we move to the expert consensus, where experts, based on their experience, can also give evidence. Then the level 2, evidence from quasi-experimental designs, you know, where you carry out like a before-after study, where you have an intervention and you check what happens before the intervention and then what happens at the end of the intervention. That's the level 2. Then the highest level in terms of research evidence is the true experimental designs, where you have randomized control trials, systematic reviews, and then meta-analysis. And that's why I've presented pyramid. We call it evidence pyramid, where you have the lowest at the bottom here, and then you have the highest, most reliable at the topmost. Now, coming to policy making and use of evidence. Now, we have talked about research evidence, but you see, we also have what is called contextual evidence and then the experiential evidence. All these must be brought together for you to make policy. And if you are taking any of them in isolation, you are going to have a serious problem as far as evidence to policy making process is concerned. Now, for instance, if we say, okay, research evidence has shown that if we implement this particular guideline, it is going to give us the best outcome. What if that guideline is in conflict with the people's tradition and belief? It is not going to work. So that's why even when you are making use of evidence, the best available research evidence, it has to be done in the context of the people that the policy will be implemented in their place. Let me give you an example. In my state, during the MDG, there was a hospital that was well equipped and sited in a local government area. It was one of the most equipped hospital because there was a lot of funding that went into it. But after the hospital was concluded, people from that local government area were not going to that hospital. So people were wondering, how can you finish building this kind of hospital and then people are not going there? So, you know, from investigation, it was revealed that that hospital was built on the land of a man who committed abomination in that village. So everybody decided they will have nothing to do with that man. So people went and got the land and sited the hospital there without consultation with the villagers. And that ended up, you know, crumbling the hospital because nobody wanted to go there because of what the culture that the people had established about us. So that's why we're talking about, you know, you can't just get the research evidence and without considering the context and then also with the experience. They are very, very important. And because we are having these three intersecting, that's why we need to have a better understanding of the mechanisms of moving evidence to policy. Now look at this. I want to now look at the mechanisms. I will take you through some of the mechanisms that will help you to understand. The mechanism number one is systems thinking. Now, what we mean in systems thinking is that, you know, it's a discipline for seeing wholes, recognizing patterns and interrelationships, and learning how to structure those interrelationships in a more effective and efficient way. You know, our colleagues who are ladies, you wear necklace. You will discover that the necklace is in place because all the chains are working to hold each other. If there is any point in that your necklace where there is a weak link or it breaks off, the entire necklace will fall off from your neck. That's what we're looking at systems thinking, where everything is working to connect each other, and then you don't take anything in isolation. Now, there is a saying that the strongest chain will break at its weakest point. So that's exactly what is happening in the kind of policies we're seeing in Nigeria. You need to consider the whole. There are so many things that are working around policy, and you need to give each of them the desired consideration if you want policies to work. Look at this model on the slide. You are having inputs, preferences, yes, values, yes, knowledge, yes, research, evidence, previous decisions. They are very important as the input into the policy process. But you see, as you are moving from input to the output, talking about decision and policies, you are having culture, you are having political, you are having administrative, stewards of health, government bureaucracies, political systems, characteristics, societal norms coming into place. Now, you need this. These are what we call institutions, norms, rules, and procedures. There is no way you can, you know, take away the culture of the people from the policy you are making. There is no way you can remove political consideration or even the administrative processes, the government bureaucracies, the political systems that characterize the process. You need all these to take them into consideration before you can get a policy. We have had situations where, you know, people do very good efforts putting together all the necessary things for policy, and because it's not in line with the political ideology, maybe with the political party in place, or maybe with the political arrangement, it gets killed. The policies don't see the light of the day. And that's why I used to advise my colleagues. I say, look, we have passed the level where you'll be saying you don't want to have anything to do with politics. May not, you know, because of your position as a professional, maybe in the ministry or in the as a career policymaker, or you are in academics. Yeah, you may not go into partisan politics, but you see, you cannot do without politics. I will explain that in the second session. If you are isolating yourself from the political process, you will not go far. You will not succeed far as far as policy is concerned, because you need to understand the political terrain. You need to understand the complexities in our politics so that you can be able to effectively move evidence into the kind of policies that will bring about the desired outcome. All these are very, very important. That's one of the things to be educated on, so that we can have a perspective about the evidence to policy process and not look at it as a linear process. It is not linear. It is not at all. You can see there is an arrow going like this, but all these other things are around it and can influence the speed with which the inputs get to output and so many other things. So it is important that you have that at the back of your mind. Now, I want to use a very important example because you all are coming from environmental perspective, environmental discipline. Now, look at this. We call this causal loop diagram. In causal loop diagram, it helps us to understand systems thinking. Now, if you look at this, let's say you want to make a policy on solid waste management system. Look at all the things that you need to put into consideration. Environmental cost saving, the waste management budget, the regulation strengthening, illegal disposal, resources gained from waste treatment, cost of waste treatment, fund needed to waste for waste management, and so on and so forth. The incineration, waste collection, waste sorting, generated waste, motivation to manage waste, so many things. This is just one of the few examples that I can just find, on this. But the idea here is that there is no way you can make policy without looking at the interconnectivity of all the key issues that are playing a role in the policy making process. That's what is called systems thinking, where you look at the whole thing as a whole. And then to even help you understand better, if you start your car, every part of the car comes into operation. The tires start moving as you press the accelerator. You can put on the light, you can put on blow the horn, everything is working together at the same time to move the car. That's systems thinking. As a matter of fact, systems thinking came from engineering, because they understand that engineering components don't work in isolation for you to be able to achieve your goal. So we are now bringing it into policy making, and WHO drove this aspect of systems thinking in policy making, and we are now into other aspects of policy also. So you need to understand this before you be able to make a headway in the policy making process. Now, look at this also as part of the examples I can find in the environmental intervention interaction. The focus here is on sustainability, but you can see here we have the environment, we have the social aspect, we have the economic aspect. Now, there is no way you can talk about sustainability of any environmental policy. Don't consider the social and economic perspective also very, very important. And we need to have broad understanding of, so that you can be able to even come up with environmental policies that are sustainable. And that's why, one very important thing I must encourage you as someone who has interest in policy is that you need to be open-minded. You need to be, as much as possible, liberal. You need to learn to work with people in other disciplines. Now, we have left the era where people are pursuing the success of social systems using monodisciplinary perspective. We have passed the era of battle for supremacy as far as disciplines are concerned. The research that supersedes the order. It's just the way our understanding in this part of the world. There is no discipline. There is, as a matter of fact, there is nothing anybody is doing in developed country that the country will value you for that. So you need to start being broad-minded and start building relationships. I will still talk about that. Start in, working in collaboration with people in other disciplines, because you need that essentially for you to be able to achieve whatever you want to pursue as far as the environmental policies are concerned. Well, we'll talk about more of this in the second class. Now, let's go to mechanism number 2, the policy cycle. Now, here we are having, we call it 6 P's or 7 P's. If you have cycle, there are key components of the policy cycle where the policy revolves around. The first one is the people and places, where you have stakeholders and institutions, government, non-governmental organizations, then communities and individuals. Very important. That's number 1. You can't make policy without looking at the stakeholders and bringing them on board in the policy making process. Very, very important. Sometimes, like what we discovered in the health sector, policies are made without bringing on board the people that the policy affects. That's a major mistake that policymakers in the past have made in this country, and we are trying to see how we can correct it at the national level. We are working so hard, with some of the policymakers at the national level and even with the National Assembly to see how we can deal with this. You can't make policy without the people. Otherwise, there will be no ownership. Let me share this experience I had when I traveled to Norway, Oslo, in 2013. Now, I was going there for a meeting, and my host told me that once I arrive at the Oslo International Airport, I should go and buy train tickets. In fact, he so emphasized it that, I had it at the back of my mind. Then as I arrived Oslo International Airport, I went to the train station and bought the ticket. And because of the emphasis the man placed on it, I was holding the ticket as I got into the train. And I was holding it in my hand. And 45 minutes to 1 hour journey. But something struck me. I noticed that every person that was entering the train bought a ticket. Every person, both young and old, everybody had a ticket. Both young and old, including children. They bought the ticket, their parents, and put it in their hands. And they will place it somewhere, the thing will open and they come in. Now, my greatest surprise, after about almost 1 hour journey, we all came down. And I didn't see anybody going around to check the tickets. And yet everybody that got into that train bought the ticket. And I didn't know what to say. What came out of my mouth was, God is in this place. I said, can you do this kind of thing in Nigeria? That nobody checks and then people are allowed to just do things on their own. Of course, a lot of people will not, adhere to the guidelines. So it now dawned on me that these people were part of the policy making process for that. So they protect it. The people if you don't buy the ticket, the people can go against you. So it's something that people owned. Now I'm making emphasis on that first one because that is where we are having most of the problem in Nigeria policy making at the moment, at least from my experience working in the health sector. So it is very, very important. You need to consider the people first. As a matter of fact, any policy that you have to use law enforcement agencies to enforce, you have failed in that policy. You need to get to the level where people become law to themselves. That's when policies work. Where whether there is law enforcement agents or not, people will still enforce that policy by themselves. So that's where we are getting in this country. And that's one of the things, goals that we intend to achieve in this interaction and capacity enhancement with you people that are now the critical stakeholders. Now, the second one is the process. I've explained some of it. You need to undergo some training, some understanding of how policies are formed, how agenda is set, how data is analyzed, the advocacy, dialogue, and then other formulation process, which are part of the things you are going to get in this. And then, of course, the price tag. Policies require resources to be able to both develop and implement. Then we have the paper. Paper has to do with the law. the law, policy laws, regulation. And these are another aspect that is also of a great concern to me. I discover in this country that we are talking about a huge gap between researchers and policymakers, but there is even a very bigger gap between researchers and parliamentarians. Now, people in the National Assembly and State Assembly, they make laws, and it will shock you that most of these laws are not evidence-based. That's why now we are promoting what is called evidence-based policy legislation. I will talk about that in the second lecture. Evidence-based policy legislation, because you can't make laws that are not backed by evidence. There is no way it will work. But when laws are backed by evidence, or laws are made based on evidence, you will have robust laws, you will have regulations that can stand the test of time. And that's where we are going. And we will get there. I am very, very sure about that, because the awareness has started. In our own little way, we have also put up series of programs that we want to use to also engage the parliamentarians at the National Assembly, where we will now introduce them to evidence-based policy legislation, so that policies can now be based on evidence, especially when they are now made laws, because that's the highest point of policy. When policies transform into laws, it's very, very important that evidence is also part of the process. And then we have program performance. And then let me say briefly about this. Now, one other problem we're having in Nigeria is that policies are not really having the the performance assessment component, the monitoring and evaluation component. Now, whenever you are making policy, you need to also include the performance assessment and monitoring and evaluation component in that policy. As a matter of fact, what I'm now promoting across the country now, especially in the health sector, and then now that we are now talking with you people from the environment, is that policies should have lifespan. Policies should have lifespan. And that's why, like I showed you at the beginning, you have that strategic health development plan, 2010 to 2015. Every policy should have that lifespan. If you make a policy, you should put a lifespan. This policy is from 2019 to 2021. Now, I'm saying this because you people are the policy makers and you are in the forefront policy development. This is the problem with not putting lifespan on policy. The policy will become obsolete after 2 or 3 years because the society is so dynamic. And if you didn't put a lifespan, they will continue to make use of that policy. Now, think about it. How much is exchange of dollar now? In black markets, I had it's getting up to 470 per dollar, naira per dollar. Now, you made a policy in 2015, and that policy at the time, it was just about maybe 250 naira per dollar, or maybe 300 and something. And now we are having 400 something. Now, there is no way you can still implement a policy you made when at the global trend, the exchange rate was at 300 and something. And you expect that policy to work now that we are talking about 400 and something. So, you know, if you don't put policy lifespan on the policy, you will create a lot of problems because many of the things would have become obsolete and nobody will think of updating it. So that's very, very important. I'm just saying this so that you can all be, you know, aware of this. And the essence of all this is so that we can be able to identify and solve a problem. That's why the problem is in the middle. Then look at the side. You have political, social, cultural, economic context. They are there. They look as if they are not very prominent. That's why it's not as highlighted as this one. But in some cases, the political, social, cultural, and economic context play the most prominent influence on all the other P's. We will look at that in the second class. Now, look at the third mechanism. We call it the knowledge to action cycle or the policy funnel. This is a little bit complex, but I'll try my best just to simplify it. What we are doing here is that we are also trying to bring another version of the policy cycle where you identify problem here, then you adapt it to local context, like I talked about contextualization. You look at the barriers and facilitators to use of evidence in the process. You now select and tailor implementation interventions, and that aspect of monitoring and evaluation should be there, both of them. And then you also you have to find a way of sustaining the knowledge use, and then it goes back to the cycle. But in between here, we have what is called knowledge creation. Now, from knowledge inquiry, here you look at so many information concerning the policy you want to go into, you do a synthesis. From doing a synthesis, you now move to product and tool. The synthesis will give rise to product and tool. And part of the knowledge product we use in policy, we're talking about policy briefs, we're talking about evidence synthesis, we're talking about summary support synthesis and all that. So these are part of the things you would do when you synthesize knowledge and get it to the tools. Then with the tools, you now put it into the policy making process. So this is what is called the knowledge to action cycle. So it starts with making inquiries, synthesizing the information, and then you now put it into the policy process, and then you now use it to formulate your policy. Now, how can we strengthen the mechanisms and support for evidence-informed policy making in Nigeria? Now, here, I am going to share with you some practical steps that we have taken in the health sector. Some of them, we've done it at the state level, some at the national level. And I believe it will help you people so that those of you who are in the environmental sector, you can now know how to bring in some of these examples and see how you can use them to move evidence to policy, the environmental sector policy making. So let me take the first model. The first model is building robust formal and informal relationships, policymakers, and developing researchers' capacity to engage policymakers. Now, relationship is a very, very critical component or model in moving evidence to policy. There is no way we can move evidence to policy if we don't find a way of getting policymakers and researchers to work together. Very, very important that we do that. And there are reasons for that. You see, you need to address mutual mistrust. The researchers don't trust the policymakers don't trust the researchers. Let me give you an example. I noticed, as a matter of fact, I started this work on evidence to policy process around 2008 or thereabout. And I discovered that prior to that time, we don't have people in the academics going to visit the policymakers for anything. So they look at those in the university as they know too much. They are always coming to intimidate us. We don't need to go to them. We don't need them. And then the researchers in the university will be looking at those in the ministries as they don't know what they are doing. They are even not as educated as us. We can't work together with them. And that's why things are not moving. That's why policies are not moving. And then I'm happy some of you listening are my colleagues from the university. You see, we need to do something about taking what is happening to the university to where they are going to be used. I'm happy one of my colleagues during the introduction, he talked about, the publish or perish syndrome. As a matter of fact, I encourage anybody, once you come into the university, you are not publishing, forget it. No matter what you do, you are not going anywhere. But then, in as much as that is the driving force, so to say, for promotion in the university, we should also be mindful of our society. The society needs the information we are generating from the university. And if they cannot get it, we will still remain where we are. But you see, there is need for efforts to be made to build trust, to build not just formal relationship. I call it informal. You need to have policymakers as your friends. I'm talking to my fellow researchers now. And you also need to have researchers as your friends. I'm talking to the policymakers now. You see, somebody has to be crazy enough to drive this. I did it as far back as 2009. And what I was doing is that any new commissioner for health that is appointed, I take my team and go and visit the commissioner. This is one of the pictures here on the left. This is the commissioner. He was newly appointed in what I had to take my colleagues from the university, from the institute, and paid him a courtesy call. You know, somebody may sit in the university and say, that is political. You don't know what you are doing. If you don't go to them, they will not come to you. In fact, as a result of this courtesy call and constant interaction, there is hardly any program that is happening as far as health is concerned. I'm saying this, you can verify that in Ebonyi State, that they don't consult me, because I have built the relationship with them. They know that, they need me. And then I also know that I need them, because I am not a policy maker, but I have the information that can help them. So that relationship must be there. There has to be a way to do that. And then one other thing we did was that we had to develop a training, a capacity enhancement training for our researchers on how they can engage policymakers. So researchers need to know how to do that, so that, we can work in harmony with them, we can engage them, we can build relationships with them, which will help us to be able to move the evidence to policy process, effectively. Now, let's go to model number 2. Establishment of mentorship program for of evidence making. Now, when we started our work, when the relationship was built between us and the policymakers were kind enough to tell us their challenges. You see, it's only when somebody has become your friend that he can tell you what is his problem. If you are not a friend to him, he will not do that. So they told us that one of their major challenges is that they don't even know how to assess evidence. Some of them don't even have computer training. They don't know how to do it. So we had to arrange special ICT training for them. You can see here we arranged one in our e-library in the university and taught them the databases they can go, where they can find information, and how they will be able to synthesize it. And then we also had a situation where we had a professor, mentoring a number of policymakers, where we were able to do that work because we had funding from WHO, and then we experimented that, and it worked. And it has now become one of the models that the WHO is using on the evidence to policy process. So that's number 2. Number 3, we established what we call the Health Policy Advisory Committee. Now, for those of you in environment, you can establish Environmental Policy Advisory Committee or Environmental Policy Advisory Committee. You can establish that. And the good thing about this committee is that it has 2 co-chairmen. I served as one of the co-chairmen, and then the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Health was the other chairman from the ministry. So we had from people from university and people from the ministry coming together, to form the committee, and it was inaugurated in the state by the Commissioner for Health. And the committee has been playing advisory role, to the government on policy issues. For instance, look at the function to offer evidence-informed advice to the government on health and health ministry regarding policy matters, to facilitate the development of policy briefs and promotion of multi-stakeholder policy dialogue in order to bridge the gap between research and implementation, and then to serve as a bridge between policymakers and researchers. So it was a very good platform for us to interact together. In fact, I want to pose to you. I hope everybody can hear me. Hello?
Yes, we can.
We can.
I can hear you.
Thank you very much.
We can hear you.
All right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. What I want to propose, with the permission of the organizers, is that after this meeting, I don't know how many of you, maybe 40 of you or 35 or so, you can form a group, a committee by yourself. You can start interacting amongst yourself now, because I know we have policymakers and researchers, and then with time, you can formalize this with the maybe the Lagos state government or the government at your various states. You will need to start something first, and then you send it to them as a proposal. From my experience, there is no government that doesn't want to succeed, and when you are providing to them what to help them succeed, they buy into it. The only thing is that you need to also take care of the political dynamics, which I'm going to explain to you in the second lecture.
Yes.
So it's important. We did this and it worked for us very, very effectively and efficiently. And then look at model number 4. Model number 4 is that we did what is called a secondment program between the university and the health ministry. Some of us, like myself, served as a secondee to the health ministry. And then we had people from the ministry coming to the university to also serve as secondees. Now, what we did was that we came together, had a meeting to take off between the researchers and policymakers, and then we started. Now, this man you can see here in the middle picture is a policymaker. In fact, as at the time the project was done, he was the director of nursing services in the Ministry of Health. So he was doing a secondment in the university, and he was here to train. There was a program, a short-term training program on health policy and health system, and he was a facilitator. Now, he didn't have the kind of theoretical knowledge that we had as professors, but he had practical knowledge that you can't buy, no professor had, because he has been in the ministry for close to, as at this time, almost 30 years. So he understands the dynamics of operations of the ministry. And these are things you can't read from any book. So we brought him here so that he could train our people and give them first-hand information. There is no way this thing would have been possible if not for the fact that there was that secondment arrangement. And then this last picture, this is the top of the Research Ethics Committee. Now, we had some policymakers, about 4 of them, as part of the University Research Ethics Committee. So with their introduction in the Research Ethics Committee, no research gets ethical approval if it does not have policy relevance. That's what is happening now, with the University Research Ethics Committee of my university, because there are policymakers there. So when people send their work for ethical clearance, we will send it to the policymakers so that they can look at what is the policy implication of this. If the person didn't include it, we'll send it back to the person and say, look, your research has no policy implication. It has no way of communicating this to policymakers. Can you please include this before we can give you ethical clearance? So that was one of the, powerful models that we use to bridge the gap between policymakers and researchers. Now look at model number 5. Model number 5, implementation of policymakers and researchers engagement meetings and policy dialogues. There are policy dialogues going on, over so many things in the state. Those of you in the ministry will bear witness to that. But you see, it is also important that we begin to get researchers to be involved. You need to also invite them, and that's where the relationship and the friendship comes in. People may not be able to come for meetings just because we invited them, but because of relationship, they will come. You know, these days, nobody goes into anything that you will not have any benefit from. But sometimes people can do something because of relationship. Some of these people you are seeing here, in fact, almost half of them are researchers and half of them are policymakers. But there was a policy dialogue on the national, on something that has to do with insecticide-treated net distribution in the states. And then the ministry was hosting it and invited researchers. The researchers that came were those who had relationship with those policymakers. So we saw it as, okay, this person is my friend, even though I may not get anything coming for this meeting, but because of the friendship, I will come. And we had a very wonderful time looking at issues from the policy perspective, from the research perspective, and then, you know, where the evidence was lacking, those of us from the university provided it. And where you need the pragmatic approach that the ministry is known for, the practical way of doing things, including the political perspective that the ministry is also aware of, they have to bring it in. And, you know, those kind of dialogues where you have policymakers and researchers help in the improvement of specific policy for the state. And like you see here, the national policy document, this was the national policy document, but after the policy dialogue, we had to now contextualize it to that of the state. So we brought in the state perspective into it and then had our own policy brief. This regional national policy document. And then, you know, at the national level, the policies are too generic because they consider a lot of things at generic level. You need to contextualize it to your state. What is obtainable in your state, the culture of the people, their socioeconomic status, and so many other things. You have to bring it, otherwise the policy cannot work in your state. So that's why this is very, very important. And then 6, this was one of the initiatives that we came up with, and the support we got from World Health Organization. We set up a policy information platform. This policy information platform is a one-stop shop and repository for strengthening the access and utilization of research evidence in policymaking. Now, this platform has all the available Nigerian health policy documents online. We produced it. So it's a one-stop shop that you just get into the platform and you can download all the Nigerian health policy documents that are in public domain. So we brought them together here. In fact, when we were producing this, we noticed that many of the Nigerian policy documents are not in the website of the Ministry of Health. Some of them are in the websites of the donors that produced it or sponsored it, and so many other places. But what we did was to gather them together. So it encouraged policymakers, because those of them who are looking for something, information on health, even at the state level, we just come to this place. It is handy and they can be able to get it. And then one other thing we discover is that, you know, the way things happen in Nigeria, when people are leaving office, they don't really do proper handing over. So some of the documents that are vital, policy documents, is either they are misplaced or maybe the person will go with it. So the next person coming into that office may not have access to any of those things to work with. So that was why we were promoting the handle your predecessors. The platform you can go and get the electronic copies. Those information. So very important. These are the statements. You can do this commissioning research by the ministry and university research by the ministry and university researchers doing policy relevant research, getting research topic area from the ministry. Now, what we did here is that because of the relationship we had with the ministry got to the extent where they are now commissioning research. They will call some of us in the university and say, this is the task we have. We want a research to be done on this so that we can use it for policy making. For instance, when this COVID-19 came up, one of the demands and requests we got from the ministry to us in the university is that we should generate local context-specific evidence on the best way that we can handle the lockdown and the relaxing of the lockdown. They didn't have that information. And what we did was that in the university, we now arranged for the research and then carried out the research across the local government areas of my state. And we generated the evidence and handed it over to them. And that helped for them to be able to know how to go about, managing the lockdown and then easing it. So we played a very vital role in the ministry's efforts towards that. And, to just show you some examples, these are, I just have 2 papers here. These are some of the papers, or a few of the papers we did, along with the policymakers. So in this paper, we have policymakers and researchers as co-authors. All right, you can see with this now, the ministry will also own it because some of the key people in the ministry participated in this project. There is what we now call co-creation, co-implementation of knowledge, where the researchers and policymakers are coming together to create knowledge, and then they are also partnering together to implement. This is very, very important, and that's one of the things that can help us in bridging the gap between research and policy. Then we did an ambitious one. We dared to enter into the parliament, and we started with our State House of Assembly. I know this may appear a little bit to some of my leads who are coming from the university, but let me tell you something. These people will think that they are unapproachable, these politicians. They are the simplest people to work with. The only thing is that you need to understand the dynamic working with them. They are the simplest people to approach. Politics naturally makes you the people's person. So every politician depends on the people because you need the people to win election. So anything that has to do with people-oriented thing that can benefit the politician, he listens to that. Especially if that thing can improve his electoral advantage, he will listen to it. So that was part of the things we used. I will talk about that in the second class. That was part of the thing. And we got into the State House of Assembly. And what we did here was to train them on evidence-informed policy legislation. This is the speaker. That's myself here. I have some of my colleagues, from the institute here. The others are all the lawmakers in the state, and they stayed because we presented it to them as this thing will help you in your lawmaking. You can't be making law and you don't have evidence you are using for law, legislative activities. And they bought into it. And then we had the training, had time to interact with them. And when we now in our House of Assembly, when there is any issue to debate, what is on everybody's mouth is which evidence are you bringing? What evidence are you using to support this? In fact, if you're going to make a presentation in the House, you must have evidence to present that even budget, defense, and all that, you are coming with evidence to the House of Assembly. So that's what we succeeded in doing. And now we have taken it to the national level. So we have a series of programs coming later this year where we'll be engaging the National Assembly. And then we even started one of it last year, November, that two of the facilitators attended. So we are broadening on that. And then we want to now get from the National Assembly key staff to the lawmakers themselves. So it's a process, but it's ongoing. And we are trying to partner with all the various institutions that are directly involved in engaging the parliament. Now, this is very, very important because you need them so that you can be able to promote evidence-informed policy making better. Now, this is the final model.
Okay, because your time is up, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the final model, as a matter of fact. Now, we are establishing a rapid response service. This rapid response service is within the university, so that when policymakers request for anything, as far as evidence is concerned, we provide it for them within 72 hours. Now, let me close with this. I love lions, like I said at the beginning. And this is an African adage associated with the lion. Said, no matter the economy of the jungle, I can never eat grass. It's not pride, it's just who I am. I hope you'll be able to get one or two things from this. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Dr. Temitope for the opportunity and the whole of you there. Thank you very much for your attention.